Okay, welcome everyone to our weekly financial support group. This started out as coping with COVID since we were all going through some craziness with the pandemic together. And now it has evolved to be sort of a general Q&A, although there are definitely still plenty of COVID related questions that are coming up, especially related to PPP forgiveness. And this week there have been quite a few questions around the EIDL program. Sounds like the SBA is sending out approvals for some of you to receive your EIDL funding. So we will definitely make sure to answer those questions. Thanks to those of you who are already using the chat. It's lovely to see all of you as well. Definitely, if you have questions as we're going through some of this information, for sure, put those questions in the chat. This is being recorded, and so I know a number of people will be watching the recording later, and I'll call out the questions that do show up in the chat. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Elaine. It's wonderful to be here with you having these conversations about money in the arts. And as you know, I'm the luckiest CPA ever because I get to have these conversations with people. And of course, this is educational information and not to be considered tax, legal, or accounting advice. So as I mentioned today, we'll talk about PPP, especially forgiveness. There was some guidance that came out a week or two ago now that people are using to process some of those forgiveness applications. We'll talk about some EIDL stuff, a couple of unemployment questions that have come through, and then a couple of sort of bigger questions around cash flow and monetizing your value. So we'll touch on all of those things today. I did want to go ahead and start with a poll. We did this way back 10 weeks ago at the very beginning, just a little bit of a check-in to see how everybody's doing right now. I launched the poll. You should see it on your screen. A handful of you are voting already, which makes me feel pretty good about everything. And let's go ahead and end the poll and I will show you the results. Looks like we're doing okay. One of you is doing really well. I love hearing that. Two of you are really struggling today. And I don't know if that's continued pandemic stress or stress of some of the events over the past week or so related to all the protests and the police brutality. And then the rest of you are kind of in the middle. So hang in there. I hope you're okay. I'm kind of there with you today. I was really sort of questioning this morning, what's the value about talking about money when there are so many, which feels like really bigger deal things going on right now. And I decided that this is what I'm able to do. And this is what I do, talk about money. And we're gonna just go ahead and keep doing that. So for those of you that are struggling, I'm really sorry. And I hope after the next hour or so together, you feel a little bit better. If not, you can always stick around or we can have a private check-in if what you're struggling over has to do with money. I can provide some help. Or if you're just using this as a grounding sort of hour, I'm okay with that too. Digging into the money side a little bit, I'll warn you, there will be another poll coming up towards the end about spending and cash. I'm curious about how your spending has been lately and also how much cash you have on hand. There were a couple of questions related to that that we'll touch on towards the end. You already know what we're talking about: PPP, EIDL, unemployment, all of that good stuff. Let's start with EIDL. This I thought was a really fantastic question that came in via email. This person asked, do they lose unemployment in California if they accept the EIDL loan? I couldn't find like a very clear, specific answer on this, but I believe the answer is no. I believe you do not lose unemployment if you accept the EIDL loan. Because remember, EIDL is something that you're going to have to pay back. So it is technically not income to you at all. It is simply an influx of cash that you can use to support your business. Now, related to that, do you have to spend it in a certain way? Yes, kind of. EIDL is much more flexible than the PPP money. Remember, for that PPP program, you have that money and it has to be spent on payroll expenses or rent for your business or mortgage interest payments or utilities for your business, right? That's pretty limited. EIDL funds can be used in a lot of different ways to support your business. So if you need to purchase equipment or inventory or supplies or rent or utilities or anything else like that, those are all okay under the EIDL program. Now, where it's getting a little bit interesting or tricky or dicey is when it comes to the question of, can you use EIDL to pay yourself, right? Because remember, under PPP world, as a self-employed person, you can use some of that PPP money to pay yourself, even if you don't pay yourself as an employee, right? And there's some calculations to go through for that, and calculations that changed, by the way. I feel your frustration. So EIDL is a little less clear. There was guidance that said it cannot be used to make distributions to owners, and certainly not for bonuses. But there's other guidance out there that says payments to owners to complete services is okay, right? And by the way, all of this guidance applies whether you are a sole proprietor or an LLC or an S corporation or any other type of business, right? So if you are an independent contractor, you count as self-employed sole proprietor, right? So all these EIDL rules still apply. So the question is what you would pay yourself as the owner of a business in the normal course of business, is that allowed under EIDL? One accounting firm says if it's in payment for services, yes, that should be allowed. Other guidance I've seen says, even if it's allowed, this is still a loan, so you might not want to do that. EIDL doesn't have any sort of forgiveness associated with it, right? Remember, the PPP money, that's a forgivable loan if you meet certain qualifications, so you do not have to pay that money back. EIDL, you have to pay back. So here's what I would say. This would be my general advice, although, you know, it's hard to say I'm giving you official advice because a lot of this is unclear. I see someone just shared in the chat that they asked some of these questions to the SBA and they can't answer them. And part of that is because the SBA doesn't necessarily really know yet either, which I know is so frustrating, right? So here's what I would say. If you need access to money to pay for general business expenses, and if you are thinking long-term and you think your business is going to bounce back so that you'll be able to pay back this amount in the next 10 years or so. Technically, you can have up to 30 years to pay it back. I wouldn't plan to pay it back over 30 years. I'd maybe look at a shorter time frame, right? And if you do some modeling around your business and you say, you know what? Yeah, I'm pretty confident that things are going to bounce back for me in the next year or two, so I will be able to pay this back. And you're planning to use it on business expenses, not necessarily paying yourself, but business expenses, supplies, equipment, rent, utilities, all that good stuff just to keep the business going, even advertising, marketing, whatever you kind of feel like you need, then I would say, yeah, EIDL could be a good option for you. Part B is I would want to make sure we're modeling out what your payment is going to be. So let's say you're going to borrow $10,000, right, from this EIDL program. Then we would want to look at, build a model around what your payment back will be. You have a year before you have to start making payments, but that loan is accruing interest during that time. It's only 3.75% interest, so it's not high interest at all, but it is accruing interest, and you do have to start paying it back every month after that first year deferral. So I'd want to kind of dig into Excel with you and see if you think you could reasonably afford those monthly payments and what kind of things you might want to pay attention to see if that works. Oh, okay. So this person says her payments, she's already done this. Well done. I'm not surprised. Your payments are $21 a month for 30 years. So as you're looking at your business and whether or not it's going to bounce back, do you think you could handle a $21 payment every month for the next 30 years? I would say, I don't know how old you are, but I would say I wouldn't want to commit to a 30-year loan. I mean, I know those are the terms. I would probably model it over, say, a 10-year period, maybe even a 5-year period, just to see if you could reasonably take care of it in that time period. It won't be exactly 3 times, the monthly amount or something like that, but that's kind of what I would look at. And then if you think that paying that back over, say, a 5 to 10-year period totally works, and you're pretty confident about your cash flow and that stuff, then EIDL could be a great option for you, because again, that's a really sort of low interest rate, which is kind of nice. Here's the thing though, if your business is unpredictable, and I see you're a freelancer, so yes, it is unpredictable, then it's really a question of, do you want to take on that volume of debt and that uncertainty? Because you're signing paperwork that says you'll pay it back, and that's kind of terrifying. I also see in the chat, I will point out some individuals do chat me privately if they don't necessarily want to identify who they are, or if they don't want to put some of this information out publicly. So apologies that some of you can't see them. I'm trying to call them out loud, but it is definitely possible that you're not seeing those chats if they are just sending me a private chat. But by all means, if you're comfortable putting everything in the chat publicly, that's really helpful too. So that's kind of what I would be thinking about. If you got comfortable with the repayment and the time period for repayment, and if you thought that, okay, even if my work doesn't pick up, or even if cash flow is kind of an issue, I've got these other reserves, or I've got these other options, right? Then I would say EIDL could be a really good option. I would not use EIDL if you're only thinking about kind of paying yourself. That's probably not a great use of the funds. Now, someone else received a contract from the SBA, and they shared some specific language with me, and they were concerned that some of the specific language meant they were going to be audited for the next 3 years. No, that is not the case. The language in the contract that you'll see from the SBA, if you do move forward with an EIDL loan, is that you are required to provide access to your financial information if they ask. But remember, this is not sort of a guarantee that you will be audited by the IRS or the Department of Labor or anything like that. All different groups here, right? So no, you will not automatically be audited, thank goodness. I would say though, that it is very possible that the SBA will ask to see some of your information, in which case you have to respond and share that information. That's just the price of taking money from the SBA and agreeing to pay it back. There was additional language in this person's loan terms that caused them concerns as well. This language said the borrower will furnish to the SBA not later than 3 months following the expiration of borrower's fiscal year, and in such form as SBA may require, borrower's financial statements. Now, this language made that person panic a little bit. You don't have to panic about this. If you are using QuickBooks or any other system to kind of track your income and expenses, there's a way to just generate a profit and loss statement and a balance sheet. So that's basically what you would want to provide to the SBA at the end of the year. Here's the thing though, if there are terms like this in the EIDL agreement, it's your responsibility to comply with them. So I would say go ahead and mark your calendar at the end of your year, which is probably a calendar year. So mark your calendar in early January to know you need to send your financial statements to the SBA if you do agree to take on these funds. So just make sure you're kind of staying on top of all of these requirements. I wouldn't lose sleep over them, but make sure that you are complying with the letter of the law and all of this stuff. So here's that additional language I was talking about whether or not you can use EIDL to pay yourself. This is the verbatim language from the loan agreement that one particular person shared with me. And it's hard to read, right? It's legalese. And as these words are being parsed by different experts are coming at this differently, right? So at least one accounting firm has come out and said, you know what, if you're paying the owner in the ordinary course of business, even if the owner is not an employee of the company, which obviously if you're a sole proprietor or an LLC, you couldn't be, that accounting firm is saying, you know what, that's okay. That's within the spirit of the EIDL guidance. Other people are reading this more literally and saying, no, we're not going to pay anything to the owners as part of EIDL. Where I come down on this is that EIDL is a loan. So if you are paying it to yourself, all that means is you're going to have to pay it back. Maybe not you, the human, but the business is going to have to pay it back. So to the extent possible, I would use it on expenses that you really absolutely have to incur right now, rather than using it to pay yourself. But stay tuned on this, because I imagine more questions will be answered in due course, especially as more of these questions kind of percolate to the surface. Okay, moving on a little bit to unemployment. This person submitted a question. They are a contract worker and they're looking for advice on the unemployment application process. As a contractor, you are eligible for unemployment now as part of pandemic unemployment assistance. And what that means is that in your state, and I believe this person is in Indiana, when they registered, they indicated they were in Indiana. So now, because regular unemployment has expanded to include people that wouldn't normally be eligible for it, I would say that this person should go to the Indiana Department of Workforce Development website, and there you want to apply for pandemic unemployment assistance. Now, what's kind of tricky about this is a couple things. Number one, some states require you to be rejected from regular unemployment before you get pandemic unemployment. So that's kind of the first frustration point for people. And then the second piece is if all of your work is as a contractor or someone who's self-employed, then sometimes proving your unemployment is a little bit harder. So what most states have been asking for is that you provide documentation from your 2019 taxes to show how much income you earned during the covered period, which right now, if you're applying, would be calendar year 2019. So if you've got a tax form handy, that's a good thing to do. If not, if you've got 1099s, or if you have another way of showing the income that you are not earning anymore, that's what I would suggest using to apply for unemployment in Indiana, which again, it's better than it was a few weeks ago, but it's still a little bit of a clunky process because these systems weren't designed for self-employed individuals. Now, your unemployment will go back to the day that you stopped earning money, and especially if it was because of coronavirus or COVID-19. So that could go back a substantial period of time. The benefits are retroactive, so definitely go back through your records, see when it was that you stopped earning money. And I know as someone who's self-employed, it's not always clear, right? But do the best that you can and report that information. I'd also encourage you to poke around on Indiana's Department of Workforce Development website. Some states have been putting together guides for people to use as they are applying for pandemic unemployment assistance, and those are really, really helpful. As of a couple weeks ago, I hadn't seen one in Indiana, but they could have added one by now, and that would be really fantastic. Generally speaking as well, through the end of July, if you are getting unemployment benefits, either through regular unemployment or through this pandemic unemployment assistance program, if you are getting those benefits, you will also generally automatically receive an extra $600 per week. This is that additional expanded unemployment benefit that was meant to enable people to very comfortably stay home while they were sheltering in place. Those benefits extend through July 31st. And then at that point, the extra $600 ends, although unemployment for independent contractors does continue through the end of the year. Question in the chat. This person, the person who asked the question, has one small contract going on as there's someone who's self-employed. And of course, they work with a bunch of different clients or people, so that's possible. The question is, do they need to be completely without earning any income in order to apply? And the answer is no. This expanded unemployment does cover loss of income, but, and this is a big but, depending on how much you're earning on a weekly basis. If you are earning more than what your unemployment benefit would be, you will lose your unemployment benefit for that week. So unemployment works, you have to recertify each week that you are still unemployed. So as part of that recertification process, you report anything you earned during that week. So let's pretend this person is a graphic designer and you work with, 6 or 7 different clients, and all of them have paused all of their graphic design work except for one client who's still paying you, say, $100 a week or something like that, right? What you would do is continue to report what you're earning, $100 per week, and then based on the unemployment benefit you had, which is probably going to be just under half of what you would earn on average during a week, then $100 may be so far less than that that you wouldn't necessarily, that wouldn't jeopardize your benefits. But it is something you would want to think about and sort of do the math on. The question in the chat, is this pandemic unemployment assistance, PUA, supposed to go back to the date of the last self-employed work too? Great question. So that extra $600 piece only started the week of March 29th, I believe. So that extra $600 goes from the end of March through the end of July, basically, but only for that period. Expanded unemployment benefits to someone who is self-employed, those do go back to the date that you became self-employed, but definitely not that extra $600 piece. Okay, yes, you're very welcome, anytime. Another question. Oh, someone asked, did I find out about Arizona? And no, I completely forgot to look up Arizona last week. So yes, I will go ahead and do that before next week. And I'm sorry about that, because I think I told you I was gonna look up North Carolina too, and I didn't do North Carolina yet either. But I will go ahead and dig into those benefits. And clarifying question in the chat, if this person is getting $56 in unemployment plus the $600 that ends in July and they're freelance, will they get a 1099 at the end of the year for the unemployment benefits each week and the $600? And the answer is yes. You will be 1099 for that income at the end of the year. And then the $600, of course, per week would end in July, and then you would be getting your regular unemployment benefits. I see this person clarifying their 1099, but they did do one job as a W-2. If you did a job as a W-2 person, that shouldn't affect whether or not your unemployment is going to be reported to you on 1099 at the end of the year. I suspect I'm misunderstanding your question though. Yep, I am misunderstanding your question. Okay, I will be patient and ask you if you don't mind either typing it in the chat or if you just want to hang out at the end of the call, I can talk through it with you. This person asked, how should they know if they should apply for unemployment and when does unemployment begin? And then how do they show lost income? This person is also based in Indiana. And remember, these unemployment benefits vary by state. But in general, you show lost income by reporting your average income for the period that they're looking at. There's a look back period or a covered period. So we look back to see what your average weekly earnings was during that period. And for most states, we're looking at calendar year 2019. And we prove that income based on your tax filings, generally speaking, although it could be other ways as well. Maybe you have contracts, maybe you have some 1099s, maybe you have one of those reports from QuickBooks that shows your income and expenses for the year. That could also serve as documentation that you would provide as part of this process. And then your unemployment officially begins on the day you stopped earning money as a result from the pandemic, right? Assuming that you're eligible for pandemic unemployment assistance. If you had a W-2 job and they laid you off, then your unemployment would begin the day after you became unemployed, you were laid off. But for someone who's self-employed, it's a little fuzzier because many people are trying to get additional work, right? But they just aren't able to right now. So it goes back to the day you became unemployed. How should you know? I would say based on kind of looking around and seeing what you're earning and what's reasonable for you. I think for many, many individuals, they are not making anywhere close to what they would be normally making right now. And these benefits exist to support individuals during this time. I was on a chat last week with a group of artists and someone raised the ethics of applying for unemployment. And I love that that question comes up because I think a lot of us wrestle with, am I taking a benefit away from someone else and do I really need it more than someone else might? And here's the thing, there is not the level of scarcity with unemployment dollars that we've seen with some of the other programs. Now, that's not to say run out and grab all of your dollars, but it is to say, as you're looking around, it's important to recognize that these benefits exist so that you can continue contributing to the economy and supporting yourself and buying groceries and doing all of the important things that you need to be doing right now, because all of us are going to need the arts as we continue through this, and especially after the past week or so, the arts are a source of healing and release and support, and we are really going to need them. And if one way of supporting the arts is continuing to support artists through unemployment benefits, that's okay, right? So it's okay for you to apply for these benefits. They exist to support you. Question in the chat. Hannah says, if I earned much more one week than my unemployment benefit and the $600, shall I skip the week without claiming benefits? Or might I still get the $600, but not the base unemployment? If you earn so much more that you do not get regular unemployment for that week, there would be no additional $600 either, because the extra $600 only goes attached with the unemployment benefit that you get for the week. So as you recertify for that particular week, you would report whatever you earned, and that might mean your benefit for that week is zero. But then the following week, you might be back in the queue to earn additional unemployment or collect additional unemployment as well. And that would also include that $600 additional payment. And then she continues, you're trying to decide how to report $5,000 of earnings for 1 week, if you should skip the claim that week. I would say yes, because if you're earning $5,000 for that week, you definitely want to be honestly reporting any earnings that you're having during that week. And so you go ahead and report that. And then the following week, when you don't have that level of earnings, you would report zero or whatever it is, and then go back to collecting the regular unemployment plus that extra $600 piece. And then at the end of the year, will you be paying taxes on the unemployment plus benefits on the state or federal level? Yes, you get to pay state taxes and federal taxes on your unemployment benefits, because that's treated just like any other income would be treated. So if you live in a state like Texas where there's no income tax, then you're only thinking about a federal income tax liability. But for most of us, you're looking at state and federal tax obligations. All right, PPP. Oh, actually, let me go back. I'm going to scroll up because I think I saw at least one more unemployment question. Okay, the question is, do I have any suggestions for the actual application? This person has started 3 times already, but had to stop halfway through because the system wasn't designed for contract workers. I'm sorry. And then they go on to continue since they need to be denied anyway. Should I just guess my way through and try to finish the application? I totally feel your frustration. My suggestions would be take a look and see if Indiana, this person is from Indiana, if they are trying to kind of control the traffic to the website in any way. I don't think I've seen this on Indiana's websites, but some states are saying, okay, if your last name starts with the letters between A and F, we want you to apply on Monday or something like that. So my first thing would be, let's see if there are any things they're trying to do to get people to apply to kind of control the flow. If that's not an option, maybe you're a night owl or a super early bird lark, and you can sort of hop on the system at a time when a lot of other people might not be on, and then you might have better luck getting through. I think if it's a matter of answering questions that weren't designed for you, I would say do your best. My first advice would be take a read through some of the frequently asked questions that is posted on Indiana's websites, because some of those questions do say things like, what should I put on line 4? And they say, if you're self-employed, put XYZ on line 4 or something like that, right? So first kind of read through those questions just to make sure you've kind of got the guidance in your head as you start the application. And then I would say, do your absolute best. I don't think I would say, just guess to get through the system, because you don't want to do that. You want to put forth a good faith effort. But if you have read through the frequently asked questions and you have a sense of what they're asking and you're answering the questions to the best of your ability, I think that will put you in a good spot to get through the system in the way you need to get through it. Someone else put in the chat, this is a clarification about unemployment in Ohio. If you report earnings above your benefit one week and then not the next, they just ask you why, and then they give you some options to pick from. And this person said one-time earnings is an option to pick from, which is great. I love that Ohio is there. Depending on what state you're in, it may be super clear or it might be a little less clear. But yeah, definitely just report your earnings in the week as part of your recertification. And then the following week, report nothing if you had no earnings. Okay, PPP forgiveness. I'm switching gears on you again. First, we talked about EIDL. That is the loan from the SBA that some of you are eligible for or thinking about accepting. Then we talked about unemployment, and now we're back into PPP world. PPP are those forgivable loans that went through the SBA, but then they went through your local financial institution. And this person is asking, or they're hoping to learn more about exactly what they need to show to make their PPP loan forgivable. They are self-employed, no employees, and they received $4,000. I'm so glad you asked, because the SBA released their loan forgiveness application and some additional guidance around this. Now, there are still questions, because there will always still be questions, but here's what I would say. What you need to show to have your PPP loan forgiven is basically documentation that you spent the funds on things you were allowed to spend the funds on. So if you received $4,000, at least 75% of that has to be on payroll. Since you are self-employed, your payroll is money you're paying yourself, right? So what I would do is transfer $3,000 from your business bank account to your personal bank account, and note on the transfer, or maybe provide some sort of invoice or documentation, just something to show that that is a payroll amount to yourself. Now, here's the other kicker, and I'm still slightly annoyed about this. You need to also look at your Schedule C from 2019 and look at the number on line 31. Take that number, divide it by 52, and then multiply that number by 8, right? So we're getting a weekly average payroll amount based on your 2019 net income from your business as a self-employed person. And then we're multiplying that weekly amount times 8 weeks. So if that number is more than $3,000, totally fine. You are good to go. If it is less than $3,000, let's say it's $2,990, all of a sudden our forgiveness language says you can only pay yourself up to 8 weeks of your 2019 average weekly income. which is super, super annoying because the application was based on 2 months out of 12, not 8 weeks out of 52. And that feels like a distinction without a difference. And on a lot of the sort of major PPP webinars I've been listening in on, everybody's like, oh yeah, it's just kind of ish numbers. But for self-employed individuals, these are not ish numbers, right? This really matters, because if you think about 12 months, having 4 weeks in a month, that gets you to 48 weeks. But we're using 52 weeks instead. So there's a mismatch in the math. And I am so sorry, because this is really, really annoying. So if you do your math and you realize you can only pay yourself $2,990, you've got a $10 mismatch there, you want to go ahead and pay that back right away, because that is not going to be forgivable, right? So definitely make sure you are only paying yourself up to 8 weeks of your weekly average amount from your 2019 Schedule C, and then anything else you can spend on rent for your business. Maybe you rented a studio or some sort of office space or something like that, or utilities for your business. And utilities is defined, I have this here, so I want to be careful with the language. Covered utility payments include electricity, gas, water, transportation, I'm going to come back to that, telephone or internet access, right? In all the discussion I've heard, transportation is referring to like a fleet of vehicles, right? It feels too aggressive to me to count like business miles driven in your car as a forgivable or covered utility payment. Maybe prove me wrong, right? If you're, up for a fight, but the spirit of this guidance seems to suggest they're talking mostly about electricity, gas, water, internet access, right? Those are the kind of utilities that I would suggest you use. And so those other payments, rent for your business property, or those utility payments is what you can use that extra $1,000 for from your PPP. And then you want to show the documentation that you're spending that money on those things, and then provide that documentation to your lender, your banker, along with your loan forgiveness application. I hope that's helpful. I expect we will keep seeing additional guidance come out from this PPP system. If you have been kind of following what's happening with Congress, you maybe know that the House passed legislation that made some of these requirements a little bit more flexible. The Senate is considering them as well. There are some differences in the two different packages. One expert I heard from Americans for the Arts last week expects a final vote on Friday of this week. So we'll see. Follow-up question. This person says, when I say pay that back right away, do I mean before you apply for forgiveness? Or do they apply for forgiveness and then immediately pay the difference? Honestly, it probably doesn't matter. I would say it might confuse your bank if you try to pay that back before you apply for forgiveness. And for PPP, we're talking about a 1% interest rate. So in my example, $10 at 1% interest per year for maybe 2 months out of the year is pocket change, right? So I wouldn't worry about paying it back like today, especially if we're talking about a $4,000 PPP moment. If your PPP number were like $40,000, right, that interest for a couple months might make a little bit more of a difference. But what I would not do is spend all the money on groceries, right? Because if you need to pay that money, that $10 or whatever it ends up being back to your bank, you want to make sure you have the cash to do that. So that's what I would be careful about. Question in the chat, can you use 100% for payroll? Is 75% a min or a max? Fantastic question. 75% is a minimum, right? However, if you are self-employed and you are the only person paid through your company, you also have a maximum of 8 weeks of your 2019 net profit from your business, right? So 75% is the minimum amount you have to spend on payroll. And if you're paying other people, yeah, spend 100% on payroll. That's totally fine. But if we're talking about payroll for yourself and you are self-employed, right? So you're not getting a W-2 necessarily, you're a sole proprietor or the only owner of an LLC, 75% is your minimum, but you also have this other maximum that is 8 weeks of last year's line 31 on your Schedule C, right? So you've got this maximum competing against this minimum, right? So things get a little fuzzy right there. So excellent clarifying question. Thanks for that, Ara. Okay, I'll pause for just a second before we move away from PPP, just to see if there are additional PPP questions in the chat. Again, for PPP, you are going through your bank. It's guaranteed by the SBA, but your relationship is with your bank or whatever financial institution or company approved your PPP and sort of put that through. So that's the group that's going to be approving forgiveness for you. So that's where you're going to be submitting your forgiveness paperwork. Not seeing anything else come through the chat. So hopefully we're okay for right now about PPP. Again, we'll probably talk about this again next week, especially if there is additional legislation. So stay tuned. I just launched another poll. This poll is about your business spending, and then it's about how much cash you have on hand in your business right now. So go ahead and answer those questions. I'm curious to see how this group responds relative to some of the other stats we're seeing in the industry. All right, I keep seeing the responses trickle in. I'm going to give this a little bit more time so we can gather as many responses as possible. All right, thank you. Oh, way to squeeze that in there, whoever just submitted. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll right now. This is what we are seeing. I shared the results with you. Looks like 40% of you, maybe 70% of you are saying that your spending is down. 40% say it's way down. 30% say it's down a little bit. And then the rest say it's about the same. Nobody's spending more on their business right now. And then in terms of how much cash you have on hand, this looks like a pretty perfectly distributed bell curve there. It looks like at either end, someone has almost nothing and someone has more than 6 months, and then the rest are sort of clustered in the middle, which is, you know, about what we would expect, more or less. We always expect a bell curve. What I'm seeing is that 42% down is where most people's spending is right now. So whether you call that a lot or a little bit, I guess is totally up to you. But most individuals and business owners are spending about 40-ish% less on their business right now. So that seems consistent with many of you. And as you think about who you serve, it's interesting to think about their perspective of spending maybe 40% less on their business expenses or their personal expenses as well, and think about sort of the domino effect that that has on your own business. And then in terms of how much cash you have on hand, you know, I'm kind of delighted to see that a handful of you have a couple of months at least worth of cash on hand. That is not always the case, especially in the arts. And so I do really appreciate that many of you do have some cash on hand. And that'll become important when we get to a couple of questions from now. This person asked a question about sort of defining their value. And I love this question because it brings, I think, so much vulnerability to this conversation. This person shared that they love giving their time and talents to the community. And that often leads to other opportunities to volunteer or other free or unpaid opportunities. And this person is a little frustrated by that. They had hoped that giving to their community would lead to paid opportunities in the future, but that hasn't really been the case. And then this person asked the question, am I not using these unpaid opportunities to properly open these doors? And I want to start by saying, you are using these opportunities perfectly, right? If you are getting fulfillment from them and you're definitely getting something out of it, that is okay. And I would say if it's working for you, keep doing that. And don't blame yourself for it not turning into paid opportunities, but maybe we can play with the language around it a little bit for how we can use these to lead to other potential opportunities. Maybe one opportunity is taking images of you doing work in the community or unpaid work that you're particularly drawn to, and using those images to share the story with a potential paying client. I think sometimes when we're thinking about doing community service type of work or community engagement work, if we kind of look around and there are no potential paid clients there, then I think the opportunities will continue to be unpaid opportunities. But if you think about who your potential paying clients might be and what they value and what their values are, you could use some of those unpaid opportunities to say, here's what we're doing and here's why it's really important. I had a call with a musical group earlier today, and they were struggling because they had a grant that required them to do a certain number of performances, and obviously most performances are being canceled right now, and so they're trying to kind of navigate what that looks like. And I asked sort of innocently, you know, how are you staying engaged with the other musicians right now? And they shared that they had been performing all of these virtual concerts for graduates in their community, and they had recorded these graduation commencement celebration concerts, and they had shared these with superintendents from all over the area. And so we figured out a way to use that and pitch it to the grantor as a substitute for some of the performances based on the number of superintendents who responded and said, oh, this is amazing, right? And you sort of, then you put together essentially your case for support. But I think that's an example of how, if you're kind of looking around and you're this musical group and you're saying, okay, maybe another parent would hire me to do this commencement concert, that's probably not going to make sense right now. But if you use that sort of free opportunity and tell that story to somebody who will be paying right now, I think that's a way to kind of get some extra distance out of the creative work you're doing. So if you want to stick around and talk in more detail, we certainly can and brainstorm some ideas, but don't blame yourself, right? It's not like there's some secret thing that you're not doing, right? You are totally and completely fine. This question sort of led to a little bit of a bigger question about monetizing your work as an artist, and then kindly educating people about the time and cost it takes to do your work and therefore generate its value. And I love this question. And this is one that comes up even when we're not in the middle of a global pandemic, because so many people don't necessarily understand the process and the technique and everything that goes into doing the work you do. So I would encourage you to share the joy of it. And I say that at the risk of sounding a little bit silly, right? Because my guess is this question is coming from a place where someone is asking you to continue to do more free work, and you want to help them understand that what they're asking of you is much bigger than what they might think they're asking of you. So a couple of different potential options. And here's my regular caveat, not all of my ideas are good ones. So listen for what works for you. And if one of these things resonates, that's amazing. If not, maybe we kind of brainstorm some other ideas. But I think starting with joy. I would love to be involved with something like that. I don't have the capacity to continue doing pro bono work right now. Here's my rate sheet for what I normally charge for something like this. Or you could even say, normally a project like you're describing would cost $3,000 or $4,000. I understand that might not be in your budget right now, but that's kind of where the value of my work is. And unfortunately, I just don't have the capacity for more pro bono work right now, or something like that. Or you could say, hey, I would love to do something like that. Unfortunately, this project took me 92 hours to do over the past couple of weeks. So I don't have 92 more hours to do it again right now, but I'll be happy to work with you when I do have some more capacity, or something like that. And I think it sort of depends on where you want the conversation to go next. If you're looking for it to happen and you're just looking for funding for it, then maybe saying something along the lines of, I'd love to, that feels like a really good opportunity. Something like this would normally cost $3,000 or $4,000. Would you be willing to help me fundraise or write some grants to fund the costs for something like that? You could think about taking a collaborative approach like that. If you don't want it to go somewhere and you really think they're just kind of, I hate to use the word exploiting, but using you for your good nature, I think saying, next time you have some available time for pro bono work, you'll be happy to reach out, is an okay way to handle that. The last question that came in was from someone who asked, how will I pay studio rent after they've gone through their 2 months of savings, which I think is a really, really challenging question to be dealing with right now. Because as we've seen, depending on what income you have coming in, you might be watching that balance in your savings account just get lower and lower and lower, especially as we're thinking about meeting our human needs and showing up for other artists and showing up for our communities and continuing to support everyone around us as creative individuals are wont to do. So here's what I would say. Look at all your available options for cash coming in right now. That may include PPP if you haven't applied for that yet, especially now that we know what the forgiveness terms are. If you haven't applied for PPP, you have the advantage of saying, okay, now I know I'm only going to apply for this amount that I know will be forgivable. The second round of funding has not yet been exhausted, so that could be an option for you. And again, you can use that to pay yourself if you were self-employed, and for your rent, which it sounds like you have, and utilities. So that could be an option. If you've already gotten your PPP, you could explore what unemployment looks like in your state. If you're looking at your business and saying, you know what, people are not buying what I am selling right now or hiring me to provide the services that I usually provide right now. So unemployment could be an option. I'll remind you that if you are taking PPP funds, you can't apply for unemployment during the overlapping time period, right? So just pay attention to the timing and track those dollars where they're going. So if PPP isn't an option, then if unemployment isn't an option for you, or maybe you've exhausted those benefits or something, then I would say you could maybe consider one of those EIDLs. That's the loan from the Small Business Administration. That is a loan, though. You do have to pay it back. So before I thought about EIDL, I would probably think about maybe those emergency resources available to artists. It's not like they're just freely available everywhere, but a number of cities have started providing emergency grants to artists. Generally, they're in the couple $100 range, although I have heard of some higher ones, right? So that could be an option. And generally looking at the city level or the municipality level is going to be a good bet for you right now. The state arts councils don't have a whole lot of extra resources right now, and most of their funding, especially funding from the NEA, is going to arts organizations. So for individual artists, I'd suggest looking to your cities. There's also a website called artistrelief.org. They are putting together $5,000 emergency grants for artists. That is a national collaboration among a lot of different organizations that are really trying to support individual artists in particular. So I think that could be a good option. I see someone put in the chat a great suggestion. Andrea, thanks for that. Andrea shared the building they rent from is allowing some deferred rent for now. That's a great idea. A lot of landlords are being flexible. We're seeing a couple of different models. My favorite one is if the landlord would simply pause your rent for, say, April and May, or if we're talking about now, maybe June and July, and then just add those 2 months to the end of your lease. So maybe your lease was normally going to end on December 31st. Maybe you just extend it to, say, February 28th and make up those additional months then. If your landlord has flexibility from whoever the landlord is paying a mortgage to, which did exist for the past couple weeks or so, there could be some wiggle room there, which I think would be really, really helpful. Another question that came through to me in the chat. This person is a musician, and so they've been doing virtual collaborations with different artists, which I love. Artists, musicians, professional, and from local churches and schools. It's generating really positive results. Congratulations, that's really exciting. And then other people wanting to collaborate. This issue, or the issue this person is sharing, is it takes many hours and specific gear that they don't necessarily currently have. So the question is, do I have any ideas on how to search for sponsorships to buy better computers and mics and cameras and softwares so that you can keep doing that work? I love this question. I think it's fantastic. I would say when it comes to sponsorships, I would suggest that you lean into the companies and the industries that are doing okay right now. I would probably start with your financial institution, especially if you applied for some PPP funding. And even if you did not, reaching out to your banker and just saying, you know, things are going okay for me right now. I don't need to apply for PPP through you, but could you direct me to whoever at your bank or financial institution oversees sponsorships? I have an opportunity and I'd like to share some sponsorship information with the right person or something like that. Financial institutions are doing okay right now, so they are kind of ripe for sponsorships. I would also say distributors and sort of grocers and a handful of technology companies are still doing okay. So if you're kind of looking around in your area and there are companies that are okay, that could be a really good place to kind of lean into for some sponsorship opportunities. I would also say tap your network, especially there are a lot of musicians that might not be using their gear in the same way you're wanting to use it right now. You could think about maybe putting together a trade or some rental, or some sort of collaboration with them where people put forward microphones or something like that, and that could be an option. I could say even you might want to think even further outside of the box and build on some of this kind of positivity you've generated. You don't say if you've been doing this for free or not for free, but perhaps you've been gathering contact information from people who have been enjoying these performances or something like that. Could it be possible to reach out to them with a follow-up email that says something like, "Thank you so much for joining us. It was amazing. We'd love for you to consider a contribution of $15 to help us buy better microphones so we can keep doing this," or something like that. If that feels kind of silly or like it doesn't necessarily make sense, you could think about doing a specific dedicated concert that was maybe a ticketed event that you were using to generate income for that. Oh, yep, this person confirmed that these events have been free so far. So I think that's an opportunity to kind of build on the goodwill, and then maybe invite people to support you continuing to offer these things for free, especially if you're working with some larger organizations. You mentioned religious organizations and other collaborations. Could be interesting to kind of lean into that and see what kind of building the community around raising $1,000 or $3,000 or whatever it might be, make sense for you. So those would be my initial ideas. But I really like the idea of continuing that collaboration. And some organizations even, one organization in particular, they started doing sort of like salon concerts is what I'm going to call them. And so they reached out to some of their most supportive fans. And normally they would be asking these individuals to host like a small performance in their living room or something like that. So they asked them instead to host a virtual performance. And hosting the performance meant paying the performers some amount, a couple $100s, and then inviting all of their friends, and then including some sort of appeal for their friends to support the musicians in reaching their goal of whatever their goal was. So I think kind of playing around with some of that verbiage could be helpful. All right, per usual, our hour has flown by. Thank you for your questions, your chats, the private messages, and the very public ones, and all the support you continue to provide to each other. We were real heavy on EIDL this week, and PPP, we touched on some of that forgiveness information, and then unemployment as well. I'll go ahead and wrap up this webinar, and I will look forward to seeing all of you again next Monday at 3 o'clock Eastern to answer even more of your questions. Thank you so much, and I will see you again soon.